The lamb was dry, or maybe that was just the bitterness on my tongue. Every chair was full, every plate steaming, every fork clinking in awkward rhythm, but I felt like an empty seat at my own table. Douglas made sure of that. He always did. "You know," he said, swirling his wine like some smug lawyer on television, "I read an article that said loneliness actually shortens your lifespan. Guess you're trying to beat us all to the grave, huh, Gracie?" The table chuckled, lightly, nervously. His wife, Patricia, cleared her throat and looked away. Even their teenage daughter, Ivy, looked embarrassed, but no one said a word. They never did when Douglas opened his mouth. I kept mine shut, my hands folded in my lap like I was waiting for permission to speak. It wasn't just the joke, it was the way he said it, with that condescending tone he'd mastered since high school. Since he got the scholarships, the house, the job, the family. Since I moved back home 2 years ago to help Mom, after I lost my job, after the divorce, after the miscarriage no one in this room ever asked about. Douglas called me the family burden once, during a Thanksgiving in 2021. He was drunk, and Mom made him apologize. But we all knew he didn't mean the apology. And tonight, he wasn't even drunk. Just cruel. Mom poured herself more wine. Second glass, maybe third. I'd lost count. She'd been quiet all evening, smiling through clenched teeth, eyes flicking between us like a referee waiting for blood. "Grace, how's the job search going?" Douglas asked, grinning. "Still holding out for something meaningful?" His voice dripped with mock concern. I opened my mouth, then closed it. What could I say? That the only thing worse than being broke was being humiliated for it? "Doug," Patricia warned gently. "No, it's fine," I said quickly. "It's a fair question." Mom set her glass down harder than she needed to. Not a slam, but a statement. "You really want to do this?" she asked. Douglas froze, mid-bite. The room went silent. Mom didn't look at me. She didn't look at Douglas. She looked at the table, at the rolls, at the linen napkins. Then she slowly stood up, adjusted her blouse, picked up her wineglass again, and raised it. "If we're putting everything on the table," she said, voice trembling but steady, "then maybe it's time we put everything on the table." My heart kicked in my chest. She looked around the room, glass still raised. And then, she started talking. "I was 18 when I got pregnant with your sister," Mom said, her voice too calm for what she was about to do. Douglas blinked. "What?" "I hadn't even finished nursing school," she continued, not answering him. "Your father and I weren't married yet. His parents called me a disgrace. My own mother didn't speak to me for nearly a year. But I kept the baby. I kept Grace." I stared at her. I didn't know where she was going with this. I knew I'd been born early in their marriage, but I'd never heard this version of it. "Things were hard," she said. "And when Douglas came along 5 years later, things were different. He was the son your father wanted. And I let that mean something." Her hand trembled, but she didn't stop. "I didn't protect you, Grace. Not the way I should have. I let him spoil Douglas. I let him blame you when things went wrong. I didn't stop him when he said awful things. And I let that pattern repeat, even after he died. I thought keeping the peace was love. But it wasn't." Silence fell like a curtain. Patricia looked frozen. Ivy's mouth hung open. Douglas's brow furrowed. "Okay, Mom, you've had enough to drink." "No," she said sharply. "You've had enough Grace." A chill ran down my spine. "I heard what you said to her just now," she continued. "And I've heard everything you've said to her for years. You call her a burden? She moved back here to care for me when you were too busy hosting board meetings and flying to Phoenix. She scrubbed the kitchen floor when my arthritis flared. She drove me to my appointments, Doug. Did you even notice my hair's not gone gray because she dyes it for me every 2 weeks?" Douglas folded his arms. This is ridiculous. No, Mom said again. What's ridiculous is how proud you are of yourself while standing on a pile of bones you buried with charm and college degrees. He scoffed. What? You think Grace is some kind of saint? No, I said quietly. I'm just tired. They all looked at me. I'm tired of pretending I don't hear the whispers. Tired of holding my tongue because conflict makes things worse. Things are worse. Have been for a long time. And maybe it's not just Doug's fault. Maybe it's all of ours. I hadn't planned to say it. It just came out. But once it did, the room cracked open. Loretta sank slowly into her chair, her glass still in her hand. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. Douglas looked at me, really looked, like he was seeing me not as the sister who failed, but as someone suddenly unfamiliar. And for the first time in decades, I didn't look away. No one moved. No one reached for the mashed potatoes. The butter dish sat sweating beside a basket of untouched rolls. Ivy fidgeted with her napkin, twisting it into a knot. Patricia glanced between us, her fingers tight around her water glass. I could see it in her eyes. She'd never heard any of this before. Douglas leaned back in his chair, arms still crossed, his lips forming a thin, humorless line. So, what now? He said flatly. You all want me to grovel? Beg forgiveness for existing? Loretta closed her eyes. No one's asking for that. You could have fooled me. I finally looked directly at him. You want to know why I moved back in with Mom? It wasn't just because I lost my job, or because I had nowhere else to go. I moved back because I was scared. Douglas's face twisted. Scared? Of what? Of what I'd become, I said. Of how invisible I'd gotten. After Craig left, after the miscarriage, I stopped being anyone. People stopped asking how I was. They assumed I'd figure it out, but I didn't. Patricia blinked. You were pregnant? I nodded slowly. 16 weeks. We didn't tell anyone. Craig said it was too early. Then, when I lost it, he didn't say much of anything at all. Just packed a bag a month later and started staying at his brother's. By the time the papers were signed, I was applying for jobs I was too ashamed to talk about. Retail, reception, even housekeeping. I let the words hang there. I didn't cry. I thought I might. But something inside had dried up long ago. Douglas shook his head. You should have asked for help. I did, I said. More than once. You told me to get serious and try harder. Said I was too proud for my own good. I don't remember that. I do. Loretta reached over and placed her hand on mine. It was cool, trembling. You were always the strong one, Grace. That was our mistake. We thought because you endured, you were fine. That's not strength, I said. That's survival. A long pause followed. Then Ivy spoke for the first time. Uncle Doug, why were you always so mean to her? He blinked, caught off guard. I wasn't mean. I just... What? She said, voice soft but steady. Just what? Patricia leaned toward her daughter. Ivy. No, she said. He always talks over her. I noticed it last Christmas, too. Douglas looked like he'd been slapped. I was just trying to push her, he muttered. Sometimes people need a little push. She didn't need a push, Ivy said. She needed family. The words settled like dust after a storm. And for the first time that night, Douglas didn't have a comeback. No one touched their food after that. The lamb cooled, the carrots shriveled. Ivy had tears in her eyes, but she blinked them away and kept staring at her father, waiting for an answer he couldn't give. Patricia finally broke the silence. I didn't know, Grace, about the miscarriage, or how bad things got. I didn't want anyone to know, I said softly. It was easier to pretend Craig was just busy, that the silence was normal, but it started long before we lost the baby. Loretta looked at me, her brow furrowed. You never told me that. You were already dealing with Dad's health. I didn't want to add more. And honestly, I was ashamed. I thought if I just got through it, things would go back to normal. But they didn't. He changed. Or maybe I did. Douglas muttered, "He never liked me either, for what it's worth." I turned to him. "You think this is about who Dad liked? You got the house, the inheritance, the endless second chances. I got silence and disappointment." He shrugged. "You could have stood up for yourself." I stared at him. Like you did when he screamed at Mom over the electric bill? Or when he slapped me across the face at 16 because I got a B minus? Patricia gasped. Ivy's hand flew to her mouth. "You what?" Patricia asked. Douglas looked down. "He only ever hit me once." "Because you were his golden boy," I snapped. "And you knew it. You liked it." Loretta rubbed her temples. "I should have left him. I told myself he'd change after retirement. But he got meaner, quieter. I let him poison us all." "Why didn't you leave?" Ivy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Loretta looked her granddaughter in the eye. "Because I didn't think I could survive without him. That's what people forget. It's not just love that traps you. It's fear, it's habit, it's shame. And when you grow up with nothing, you tell yourself that survival is enough." That shut everyone up. I swallowed. After Craig left, I told myself I'd never let a man define me again. But I still came home hoping for something. Forgiveness, maybe? Or understanding. But it wasn't here. Not really. Patricia exhaled. "You should have said something." "I tried," I said. "But people don't listen when they've already decided who you are." Loretta's voice cracked. "We were wrong about who you are." Ivy nodded. "You're not a burden." Douglas looked like he wanted to speak, but for once he didn't. And that silence was more honest than anything he could have said. I pushed my plate aside. The food had gone cold, and my appetite had vanished long ago. "It wasn't just the miscarriage," I said, my voice quieter now. "It was what Craig said afterward. He looked at me like I'd failed him, like I'd lost something that belonged to him." Patricia's hand went to her chest. Loretta whispered, "Oh, Grace." "He started sleeping in the guest room the next week," I continued. "He said he needed space to think. But what he meant was he needed space to leave. He just didn't want to say it out loud yet." Douglas looked uneasy. "So he walked out." "That's on him, not us." I ignored him. The day I found the dating app on his phone, he didn't even bother to lie. Just said, "You're not the woman I married." Loretta covered her mouth. "I was 39, I went on, and he told me my time had passed, that if I wanted kids, I should have figured my life out sooner. Then he said maybe it wasn't a bad thing the baby didn't make it." Ivy gasped. No one spoke for a long while. Not even Douglas. "Why didn't you tell us?" Patricia finally asked. I gave her a hollow smile. "You think I didn't try?" I called Douglas once. He answered, said he was in a meeting, told me to write him an email if it was serious. His face paled. Loretta stood and walked to the window, her back to us now. "I remember when Craig came to ask for your hand. He was charming, full of ambition. Your father hated him." "That should have been my first clue," I said. "Dad only hated men he couldn't control." She turned slightly. "Your father hit me once. Just once. I told myself that made it forgivable. He said I burned dinner, slapped the plate right out of my hand." "I remember the yelling," Douglas said slowly, "but I never knew he laid a hand on you." "He didn't after that. Not physically, but the silence was worse, and I stayed, because that's what women of my generation did. We kept the peace. We held the house together, even while it crumbled under us." Ivy spoke again, her voice almost trembling. "Is that why you were always tired, Grandma?" Loretta turned fully now, tears on her cheeks. Yes, sweetheart, that's exactly why. Douglas finally broke his silence with something unexpected. Maybe we all inherited more from him than we wanted to. Grace met his eyes. Maybe you did, but I had to unlearn it every day. He nodded once, slowly. I see that now. But I didn't trust that he did. Not yet. Loretta returned to her chair slowly, the weight of years seeming to settle into her spine. Ivy reached for her hand and held it, and for a moment, 3 generations of women sat in silence, bound by pain, but also by some quiet understanding. I think I always knew, Patricia said finally, her voice small, that there was more. I mean, you can't be married to someone for over 20 years and not feel when something's missing. I just never knew how deep it went. She looked at Douglas then, not with anger, not yet, but with a questioning that made his eyes drop. I wasn't trying to hurt her, he muttered. But you did, Patricia said, and I think you knew. Douglas bristled but didn't respond. I turned toward them both. Do you know why it hurt the most? Not the things you said, but the way you dismissed me when I needed you most. That day I called. I wasn't just looking for advice. I was sitting in the dark, in a 1-bedroom apartment with no heat, wrapped in a coat because the power had been shut off. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. I had $28 to my name, I continued, and I called my brother. Not to beg, not for money, just because I didn't want to feel alone. And you told me to send an email. Douglas's voice cracked. I didn't know. No, I said. You didn't want to know. Loretta wiped her eyes. I should have seen. I should have asked. No one asked, I said quietly. They assumed I'd figure it out. Ivy looked stunned. Why didn't you tell me? I would have listened. That made me smile, though it hurt to do it. Because you were a child, sweetheart. You shouldn't have had to carry what your parents refused to. Douglas stood abruptly and walked to the sideboard, as if the act of moving might shake the guilt off his shoulders. He poured himself a glass of water, stared at the sink, and asked without turning around, Was it always like that with Craig? No, I answered. At first, he was gentle, thoughtful. He remembered the way I took my tea, would warm my socks in the dryer on winter mornings. But after the 5th year of trying for a baby, things shifted. He started measuring my worth by what I could give him. When I stopped giving, he stopped staying. Douglas finally turned. I thought I married the right kind of man. I thought I built the right kind of life. But maybe I just built a life that looked good from far away. Patricia tilted her head. What are you saying? I don't know yet, he admitted. But maybe Grace wasn't the only one who fooled herself. The house was quiet now, the kind of quiet that settles when no one knows what to say next. Only the ticking of the kitchen clock reminded us that time was still moving. Patricia reached across the table and took Grace's hand. I need to say this now, while the room is still honest. I married a man I believed was good. I still believe that, mostly. But I also see now how easy it was for us to pretend your pain wasn't ours, to treat it like background noise. Grace squeezed her hand gently, but didn't speak. Loretta took a sip of water. When your father passed, I thought maybe the air in this house would feel lighter. But the weight never left. It just shifted onto new shoulders. She looked straight at Grace. Mostly yours. Grace nodded once. I know. Douglas sat back down, rubbing his jaw like it physically ached. You always made it look easy, he said. Even when things weren't. I think I resented that. You resented that I didn't fall apart? Grace asked. I resented that you didn't need me. There was a long pause. Douglas? Loretta said slowly. She did. I see that now, he muttered. Patricia glanced toward Ivy, who hadn't said much in the last few minutes. You okay, honey? Ivy sat straight. I'm just listening. You've been very quiet, Grace said. I'm trying to understand how it got like this, Ivy said. How nobody noticed? Grace gave a half smile. Sometimes noticing would mean you have to change. And that's scary for people. Ivy nodded slowly. Then I think I want to be the one who notices. That landed harder than anyone expected. Even Douglas's shoulders sank, but Grace wasn't finished. There's one more thing, she said quietly. Something I've never said out loud, not to anyone in this room. Everyone turned to look at her. After the miscarriage, after Craig left, I found something, a folder on his laptop. It had photos, dozens of them, of another woman, some of them private. Patricia stiffened. He'd been seeing her for over a year. She was younger, blonde, wore perfume I could smell on his jacket sometimes. But the worst part wasn't the photos. It was the emails. Grace's voice trembled, but she didn't stop. He told her I was mentally unstable, that I was draining him. He said he was doing his duty by staying through the miscarriage, but that he was already emotionally gone. Loretta looked shattered. Oh, Grace! Grace looked straight at Douglas. So no, I didn't just fall apart because of a divorce. I fell apart because the man I loved erased me before I even knew I was vanishing. Douglas swallowed hard. I needed a family to catch me, Grace said, and all I found was silence. No one interrupted her, not even Douglas. The shame in the room was thick, like smoke after a fire. We had all been breathing it for years, pretending the air was fine. I never told anyone about those emails, Grace continued, because a part of me believed them. Believed I was the problem, that I asked for too much, felt too deeply, loved too hard. Loretta's voice broke. You weren't the problem. I know that now, Grace said. But back then, I believed him. And when I called Doug and he brushed me off, it confirmed every ugly thing I thought about myself. Douglas stood slowly. His face was pale, his eyes damp. I was wrong, he said, about everything. Grace tilted her head, wary. Are you saying that because it's quiet in here and you're uncomfortable, or because you actually understand what you've done? Douglas looked at her, and for the first time that night, didn't flinch. Because I understand. Because I remember how Dad treated you, and how I copied him, not with fists, but with words, with silence, with judgment dressed up as advice. His hands trembled slightly. I thought if I became the kind of man Dad respected, it would mean I wasn't weak. And the more I saw you stumble, the more I told myself you were just refusing to be strong. He took a breath. But you weren't weak. You were surviving in a way I never had to. Grace didn't cry. Her face was unreadable, but her hands were no longer clenched. I'm sorry, Douglas said. Not because I got caught. Not because I'm embarrassed. But because I made your pain worse. And I don't know if I can fix that, but I want to try. Patricia looked at him, quiet and searching. Do you mean that? He nodded. Yeah. I do. Ivy's voice was steady. Then start by listening. Really listening. To her, to Grandma, to me. Loretta cleared her throat, but her eyes glistened. I spent most of my life thinking my job was to keep this family looking good from the outside, and I let rot settle in the roots. I don't want to leave this world having passed that silence to the next generation. She reached across the table and took Grace's hand. So I won't be silent anymore. Grace nodded, then looked toward the far end of the table, where a small, unopened box sat near the centerpiece. Something no one had noticed until now. I brought something tonight, she said. Didn't know if I'd give it to you, but I think it's time. She slid the box across the table to Loretta. Inside was a set of faded, dog-eared letters. Loretta lifted the top letter with trembling fingers. Her breath caught as she scanned the handwriting. "These are," she whispered. "Dad's letters," Grace said. "Ones he wrote to me after he got sick. He left them in the attic. I found them after the funeral." Loretta's face went pale. "He never told me." Grace looked at her with something between pity and resignation. "I think they were never meant for you." Loretta unfolded the first letter with unsteady hands. The paper was yellowed and soft at the corners, as if it had been read many times before. Grace sat still, her gaze low but steady. She already knew what was inside. "I don't even recognize this handwriting," Loretta said quietly. Grace gave a sad smile. "He always printed in block letters for bills and checks. But when he wrote these, he used cursive." Loretta read aloud, her voice thin. "Grace, if you're reading this, then I've gone and left more behind than I meant to. I was never good with words when they mattered. Never good with softness. Your mother knew how to love. I only knew how to provide. But you deserved more than that. You deserved a father who looked at you and saw himself, not because you were mine, but because you were strong. You took after me more than I ever admitted." She paused, blinking rapidly. "I saw you hurting. I saw how Craig looked at you when you weren't looking at him. I should have said something, but pride is a cage, and I sat in it my whole life." Douglas leaned forward. "He knew," Grace nodded. "He didn't say it to me directly. But the letters, he saw more than I thought he did," Loretta continued. "You were my better half, even when I didn't treat you like it. I'm sorry, not in the way men say when they want to be forgiven, but in the way a dying man admits he was wrong for too long." She folded the letter back up, her hands shaking. "He never spoke to me like that," Loretta said softly. "Not once." Grace's voice was quiet. "I think he wrote those words because he couldn't say them to anyone else, not even you." Loretta looked up at her. "And you kept them all these years?" "I read them every Easter," Grace said. "It was the only time I felt like I still had a father." Douglas wiped a hand down his face. "He called you his better half?" Grace nodded. "In 3 different letters." No one spoke for a while. Finally, Ivy asked, "Do you forgive him?" Grace looked at the others. "I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to breathe again." The room stayed quiet after the letter was folded and tucked back in its box. Loretta stared at her hands, her wedding ring glinting under the soft kitchen light. Then, slowly, she slipped it off. "I spent over 40 years married to a man who couldn't say any of that to my face," she said. "But he wrote it to you. All of it. And I'm not angry. Not at you." Grace watched her, unsure. "I'm angry at myself," Loretta continued, "for staying so long, for measuring love in sacrifice, for teaching you that being invisible was noble." She placed the ring on the table and pushed it away. "I don't want that lesson passed down." Patricia gently laid her hand on her mother-in-law's. "It won't be. Ivy won't let it." Douglas let out a breath, like he'd been holding it for years. "Grace, I know one night doesn't erase everything. I won't insult you by pretending it does. But if you'll let me, little by little, I'd like to earn a place in your life again." Grace studied him for a moment. Then she looked at Ivy, at Patricia, at Loretta. "You know," she said slowly, "I came here tonight prepared to leave and never come back. I've done that before, walked away from people who couldn't love me fully. I thought this would be the same." She stood, smoothing the creases in her skirt. "But something's different now." Douglas looked up. "What?" "You're finally listening," she said, "and I'm finally speaking." Grace stepped over to the box of letters and closed it gently. "I don't need to cling to these anymore. Not because I've forgiven him, but because I've forgiven myself." Loretta stood and embraced her. It wasn't fragile. It was full, real. Stay, Loretta whispered. Not because we deserve it, but because you do. Grace smiled through wet eyes. I'll stay, but only if we do things differently from here on out. We will, Ivy said. Patricia nodded. I believe that. Douglas approached her slowly. Can I give you a ride tomorrow? To the gallery downtown? I remember you used to love it. Grace looked surprised. You remember that? I'm trying to remember more, he said. If you'll let me. Grace paused, then nodded. All right, one ride. But I picked the music. He smiled. Deal. As they began clearing the table, together this time, Grace turned and caught her reflection in the window. She didn't look smaller than the others anymore. She looked like she finally belonged,